Welcome to the Pull the Chute podcast with Jeff and Jana. This is our weekly venture into the world of small to medium-sized businesses and the entrepreneurial spirit that drives success.
So our goal here is to help you grow and to be the best you can be, both in business and personally. To do that, we identify and we discuss topics that will hopefully help you as you work to build a successful business.
We also interview business owners and executives. It's our hope that you may be able to gain insight on ways to help you be a better leader and provide a better culture for your people.
Our mission here is to help you pull the chute once a week to work on your business instead of always working in your business.
So we hope you find these discussions insightful, helpful, and useful.
And thanks for your support. We hope you enjoy today's podcast.
Well, welcome everyone to the Pull the Chute podcast with Jeff and Jana. As always, we're excited that you're here supporting us. Jana, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good.
Beautiful day in Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah, and I happen to be in Chicago this time, visiting my kids and grandkids, and it's actually a beautiful day in Chicago, which you don't get to say all that often. But we're getting colder. It's getting there. It's getting there. Hey, Jana, we have a wonderful guest today. Chris Seifert is here with us, and we are excited to talk to him. Chris, welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, Jeff and Jan. It's great to meet you.
Cool.
You too.
So, Chris, what we like to do, because we just never do it justice for our guests, is we have you tell us a little bit about yourself instead of us trying to say a little bit about you. So, do our listeners a favor and just give us a little bit of background of things that you've done and how you got to where you're at today.
Sure, absolutely. So, I've got about 25 years of operational experience over my career. I've spent about 1/3 of that on active duty in the U.S. Navy submarine force.
Thank you for your service then.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Then about another 1/3 as a partner in a management consulting firm, helping primarily oil and gas, chemical, high hazard industries with management systems and culture work. And then about another 1/3 of my career has been as an operator. So I've been a plant manager for 3 different plants, and I was the vice president of operations for a billion-dollar renewable fuel company.
Wow.
And so over the course of my career, one of the things I've found on all the teams I worked with was there's kind of 2 skill sets that people in general struggle with. One being root cause analysis, and the other being decision making. And I found lots of great companies over the years that have helped me with the root cause analysis problem, but not with the decision making. And so over the years, I had developed a decision making framework that I use and teach to my employees and teams in order to kind of help scale our decision making, right? Be able to empower them to make more decisions. And so about a year ago, I started writing a book on that topic and published it about a month and a half ago. And now I'm going out to help leaders leverage that decision-making framework in their own businesses.
That is interesting.
Awesome. And so what's the name of the book? Let's make sure we get that.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. The name of the book is Enabling Empowerment and Micromanagement and Empower Decision Makers.
Very cool.
So
love that.
So let's talk about root cause analysis, Chris.
Yeah.
So what is that in layman's terms? We all probably know. We have all probably experienced it, but tell us what it is.
Yeah. Well, look, and it actually speaks a little bit to the decision-making stuff as well. Our brains are not wired for cause and effect thinking, right? Our brains tend to, so really we have 2 systems for thinking, right? And a lot of this comes from a book by Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow. If you've never read it, I would highly encourage. It's on like my short list of books that have actually changed my life, right? The Bible, Thinking Fast and Slow, right? It's really powerful. Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for economics. He's the only psychologist to do that. And I leverage, I basically try to take a lot of his work as a doctor, right? As a PhD, and kind of how do I as an operational leader use this, right? So one of the things he talks about is there's 2 systems for how we think. System 1 is what is always on, right? It's how we're always operating. We're taking in information, we're matching it with things we've seen in the past, and we're acting based on that, right? System 2 is our more critical thinking skills, and it tends to be dormant because it uses a lot of energy, right? And if we were walking around doing critical thinking, we wouldn't drive our car if we were critically thinking about every interaction we were having on the road, right? But system 1, which is always on, only does correlation, right? It doesn't do cause and effect thinking. It's just looking for, I've seen this before, it turned out like this, so that's how this is going to turn out, right? And that's how our brains work most of the time. And we really have to train ourselves to actively engage that system two and say, no, we can't just rely on correlation. We need to look for causation, right? And so those are the kinds of things that to help, I bring to an organization in training is illustrations of how your thinking can cause you to make bad decisions, right? The way our brains are wired to work, there's nothing wrong with them. That's how they're supposed to work. But in uncertain and complex environments, those, ways our brain work can cause us some problems.
Wow.
And so do you find that at times the emotional side of our brain affects the decision making? And sometimes we make bad decisions because we make emotional decisions versus,
Yeah. Yeah.
not
Well,
emotional?
again, so system one is always on, right? And system one relies on emotion. It relies on feelings. It's how we're taking in all the information, right? And the way our brains work is system one's always on. System one takes in information, tries to come up with an answer as fast as it can, and then it asks system two to check that answer, right? And so system two kind of checks the answer. And as long as the answer sounds good, system two says, "Nah, go ahead. That sounds right." Right. And again, it's on purpose like that. System two, Daniel Kahneman would say system two is lazy. It doesn't want to engage, because if it wanted to engage, we'd be frozen with analysis paralysis all the time, right? We wouldn't do anything. We'd sit there trying to analyze everything. So I would say, emotions can absolutely affect decisions to the extent that we're not purposefully engaging system two, right? And so a lot of the book in using a decision-making framework, what we're doing is saying, how can we recognize when we are in high risk situations, right? Where we're making a decision where there's a high risk of failure, either because of the consequences or the complexity. And then how do I make sure that I'm not making these decisions with system one, right? How do I follow a process of thinking so that I'm not being, swayed by my emotions or correlation or these other decision traps?
Wow.
All right. So as you go through the process, then, one of the book really walks us through how to empower decision makers in a way that helps them make better decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the book, what I do is make the case that decision making is really important, right? For your organization to be successful. I mean, at the end of the day, understand this, right? Your success relative to your competitors is going to be determined by, do you make better decisions than your competitors? I mean, right? And I don't think most leaders, I think we spend a lot of time focusing on the execution, right? Like, how do we get better at executing every day? But we're not ever focusing on how do we get better at making decisions? How do we make making decisions be a competitive advantage? Like we know we make better decisions than our competitors. So the first, couple chapters kind of lays that out and also connects the decision-making skills of the team with how much micromanagement is going to occur, right? So the worse the team is at making decisions, the more micromanagement there's going to be, right? I mean, that's just a fact. And so if you want to stop having to be a micromanager, you need to start focusing on making your team better decision makers, right? You can't just walk out and say, give them authority to make more decisions, because, well, they're not good at it, right? And they're only going to get good at it by practicing and training and developing, right? I mean, decision making is a skill. It can be taught and it has to be practiced, right? So that's the first part of the book. And then in the rest of the book, I walk through the decision making framework I use, highlighting specific psychological traps that people fall into and best practices I've put in place to avoid them, right? So for instance, a common decision trap is anchoring, right? So we system one, when we think, tends to place a lot of value on the first information we hear, right? And this, like if you go to buy a car, right? That first number you see for the price of that car is an anchor. And if you get a lower price than that price, you're going to feel like you did well. It doesn't matter what the statistics say or what the rest of the market paid. That's what you'll believe, right? That's how you'll feel.
Sure.
So one of the things in anchoring happens in brainstorming sessions, right? So when I have a group together in a room and I say, hey, let's brainstorm some ways to solve this problem. Well, the first thing someone throws out anchors the rest of the room, right?
Wow.
They've all heard that. Now they can't unhear that and think about that, not think about that, right? So the little quick tip is before you have people share things when you're brainstorming, have them write them down on a piece of paper. That way they're unaffected by other people's answers. Then go around the room and read what they put on a piece of paper. And that way we're not, we're not getting caught up in group think about a certain solution. So that's what the book does.
That's so
great.
interesting. Yeah.
And then I guess the question I would have is, as you're helping these people become better as a team decision makers, where does and how does it fit in from a trust standpoint? Because we know that when you're making decisions, sometimes it's all about who do we trust and why are we doing this? And it's a foundation of trust.
Yeah.
How is that built into that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So the first way I usually engage helping people is the training piece, right? Like hey, understand that, decision making is a skill and we can have a framework and we can use that. How do we do that? The other thing I do help once they've kind of done that though, is sometimes we need to rewire the organization to some degree, right? Like if we've become very dependent on the leader to make all the decisions, we got to come up with a strategy for how we're going to get out of that mode of operations, right? The first thing is to upskill the people. Absolutely. We got to train them. But then it's that, how do we get that trust, right? How do we know that this person, that they've demonstrated the practice, right? The biggest thing that I found, one of the things that's very common in organizations today is, like, if you go across a large organization and look at leaders in a similar level, they'll have the same level of decision rights, what I call them, right? So for instance, manufacturing plant manager might have a plant manager, maybe there's 20 plant managers in a company. They all have the same authority to spend $25,000, right? They can approve a $25,000 spend. The question here is why that number? Right? What has that person demonstrated they make good decisions or have they not? Right? And why does everybody have the same number? What we should be doing is saying, hey, your authority, your decision rights are dependent on your demonstrated competency in making decisions. Make more good decisions, get more rights, right? Make bad decisions, lose rights, right? So, and look, I've worked in an environment like this. My first job as a plant manager was at Georgia Pacific, and I started out with $10,000 decision rights, right? So if I wanted to spend more than $10,000, I had to call my boss, and he had up to, I think, 100,000, right? And well, I would call him and go through the decision with him. Well, having learned how to explain my decisions well, he very quickly was like, Chris, you don't need to call me anymore, right? Like, this makes sense to me. If my decision rights are 1,000, now yours are 1,000, right? And then now I had to go to his boss for anything over 100. Well, pretty soon his boss said the same thing, right? Now, at the same time, there's other plant managers at other plants who aren't doing well, and their decision rights didn't go up, they went down, right? And so the point was, how do we, like you're incentivizing me to make good decisions by giving me more authority when I make good decisions, right? And so how can we set up similar, processes within your organization to mimic that?
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's great. And so the empowerment part is what you just described, by showing that you were able to handle the situations and things of that nature, right?
Right.
As you go into these places now, how are you setting up? What's a process that you put in place to help this empowerment get rolled out in a sense, right? So do you kind of teach them certain things to do? Do you teach the leaders that have maybe a $5,000 limit how to be a better decision maker so that they can be empowered and hopefully grow, go to the next level? How does that all work?
Yeah, absolutely. So usually we're combining several of these things at one time, but like we'll start out with a training, 3 to 4 hour training where we'll take basically people through the book, right? And we'll that'll be a pretty large audience, right? Like you're basically, your frontline supervisors on up. We want everybody to be familiar with the decision-making framework, right? Then we'll pick a handful of people, like 10 people or so, that we want to really be the masters at how to make decisions, right? And those individuals we'll put through a individual coaching where we'll say, hey, pick a problem or an opportunity that the organization's struggling with that you want to make a recommendation on, and bring that to this coaching. And we're going to go through the decision-making framework with you to prepare a recommendation to the leadership team, right? And then about a month later, once those people have been through coaching, we'll bring the team back together and those individuals will present their recommendations, right?
Mhm.
And so what that does is, one, they've had an opportunity to really become experts at it, right? Number two, it gives them a chance to be recognized for the skill that they've done, right?
Mhm.
Number three, it models to everybody else. Do you see how when we applied this decision-making framework, it was so easy for the leadership team to say yes to what this person was recommending because of the way they explained it? That should encourage them to, right, then, hey, like, I want to use this too. I want to be able to model this as well, right? And, and then at the end of the day, you've also got, 10 projects that should be ready to invest in right now and be better at that. So
Now, do you find any difference in the generations, Chris? Jeff and I talk about that a lot. The different, yeah, I know you smile because we probably know what you're gonna say.
Yeah, right.
But because our big thing, my big thing is communication. So I do a lot of keynoting on the very specific generations
yeah.
in the workplace now. What have you found as far as, baby boomers versus Gen X versus millennials versus Gen? What have you, anything interesting?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think the common theme is that regardless of the generation, we don't teach decision making like as a skill. Like we just don't. It's certainly business decision making, right? I mean, I have an MBA from the University of Georgia, and I can tell you in the MBA program, which it's a top 25 MBA program, decision making is not on the curriculum, right? It's not. Now, there's lots of time and energy spent on tools for doing analysis, right? And to help you in making decisions. But to think from I have a problem to, how do I identify solutions, to how do I identify risks, make the best choice, right? That's just not something that people teach. And, I think new generations tend to, the thing with the newer most ones coming in right now is they tend to be very heavily reliant on the technology and the data. And the AI portion of it. And look, AI is just as guilty. I've got an article coming out this Saturday, which will be before this gets recorded, about AI and decision making and the fact that AI is subject to a lot of the same decision traps that we are, right? It is right. It suffers from availability bias and things like the thing it can recall the easiest is the thing it will recall, right? And so I think that's a little bit of a worry for them there to say, hey, like, don't get caught up in, just because it looks like it's more accurate because there's a lot of data doesn't mean you haven't made a fundamental thinking error.
Right. Yeah.
And so as you go through and teach some of this stuff, what are one or two things that our listeners could take away from this that would help them in their decision-making process? What are one or two little things that you can help us with?
Yeah. Look, I think the biggest one, like I said, the Thinking Fast and Slow is such a book that just changed me so much because it made me realize how influenced I am by things around me, right? And context and just even the way information is presented has like a dramatic impact on like how I judge it and receive it, right? So I think like that's the biggest takeaway that I would say is just understand, like, if you're not thinking about how you're thinking, you probably need to be thinking about it, right? Because it's not as straightforward as we think. And, look, it made me realize that, look, as I mentioned, I've worked in a lot of high risk industries where, injuries and safety is always an issue, right? And over the years, I would hear, oh, that person that got hurt, right? Their risk tolerance was too high, or they made a decision, based on this or whatever. But I've come to realize over the years that, man, usually they didn't make a decision, right? System one just stuck their hand in that thing, right? And the more you can come to terms with that and understand it, then you can start really dealing with it, right? Instead of getting mad at people for just reacting to things the way their brain is supposed to react. So.
Yeah. Hey, so I have a question. Since you were in the Navy, you were an officer in the Navy, you had to make decisions back then.
Yeah.
What has changed from when you made decisions then to how you make decisions today? What's one or two things? I know the book has influenced you a lot. You said, thinking fast and slow. But is there something else in particular that you would have done different back as an officer that maybe you've learned more today?
Well, I mean, I certainly was very command and control directive, right? I had no problem. And look, I have no problem with that now to this day. I mean, when people ask what's your leadership style, I mean, my answer is it is what it has to be, right? Whatever it has to be to win. And look, sometimes that is what it takes, right? I mean, look, leaders don't become micromanagers most of the time. Most leaders don't want to be micromanagers, right? They're doing it because they have to, right? Like the situation is so bad and they don't know any other way out than to just go in and start telling people what to do, right? And so yeah, look, I certainly, transitioning from, look, there's a lot of great things you take away from learning leadership in the military, and then there's some things you got to unlearn. And the biggest one, like to tell you, just was actually when you were an officer in the Navy, people, like, there was built-in respect for your rank. Right.
Right.
Yes.
Like it didn't matter. Like nobody was going to talk to me a certain way because, I mean, I was a lieutenant, all right? You're going to talk to me a certain way. And then to go out in the civilian world and find out, man, it ain't gonna work. Like it doesn't come. You gotta earn it, so.
That's funny.
I love it. I love it. That's great. That's great. Well, Chris, we just want to thank you so much for being on the show today. Boy, time just flies. I can't believe it.
I know. It's so interesting.
But this is great. So a couple of things that I want you to share with our listeners. So first of all, how can they get your book?
Sure. It's available on Amazon. Get it Kindle, paperback. Audible will be out in a few months.
Awesome.
And you can also go to the website, www.enablingempowerment.com.
Okay. Love that.
Wow.
And we just answered the second question. If people want to get a hold of you, how can they do that? I would assume go to the website, or is there another way to get a hold of you?
That I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me there as well.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thanks so much for being on the show today. We're excited about where you're taking this. Being able to enable empowerment and decision-making is just an amazing thing. I think as leaders, we don't do enough of that. We don't enable, we don't empower. We have a tendency just to, as you described, just kind of take it over and say, I can just do it.
Yeah, look, I'm on a mission to make every company include decision-making in their leadership development curriculum.
That's awesome.
And today it's not, and I don't understand why not, right? It should be.
It should be. Yeah. It's like, Jan and I are on a mission to just help be and create better leaders.
Better leaders and better communication.
Yeah. Why is that not, the top-down mentality died 20 years ago. Why are people still doing it? I don't get it. So, all right. Thanks, Chris. We appreciate it so much. To our listeners out there, thank you as always for your support. We always love that. Keep the emails coming. We love to hear from you. And we just always enjoy when we get to have great guests like we do today with Chris. So thank you again. Until the next time, stay safe and be healthy.